Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Hippie Sh, the podcast where we talk about self-development, spirituality, and lots of fun life stuff like that. Today's episode is all about judgment, specifically how to stop judging yourself and also how to stop judging others. I will say that I believe that this episode will be particularly useful for everybody. Honestly, judgment, I think, is something that really weighs us down. We're going to kind of cover the problems with judgment as well, but this episode, I hope, will really impact your life in a lot of different areas, maybe even all 7 areas. Who knows? We'll find out. So let's get started with the definition of judgment. What is judgment? For the purposes of this episode, we're really going to focus in on judgment as the concept of assigning meaning to things. So if you are familiar with spiritual teachings, then you already know that nothing means anything automatically. Everything just kind of has the meaning that we assign to it, right? And so if you look at psychology as well, we know that a lot of issues that we have in our lives really just come from the stories that we're telling ourselves, right? And you can consider those stories as judgments. You can consider the stories that you tell yourself as a judgment towards yourself, towards other people, or just an assignment of value. Right, so judgment is just an assignment of meaning, and we're going to work on releasing the assignment of meaning, at least in areas where it no longer serves you. Obviously, if somebody pulls a knife on you and your ego is screaming that means that you need to run away, probably still do that. So let's dig in. So where does judgment come from? I think that's probably the most important thing to address, and this is going to take just a second to explain. So judgment is coming from the past, right? Your brain wants to recognize patterns. So anytime that you're having a life experience, especially a traumatic life experience, your brain is storing that for later so that it can recall things and keep you safe, so that you don't have to repeat experiences over and over again. It's how we learn, right? So if you have an experience that's less than ideal, your brain hangs on to that, files it away, and says, okay, I'm going to look out for this situation happening again. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's how you stay safe. It's how you protect yourself. It's how we learn. And because it's how we learn, it is a really beautiful part of us. The issues start to come in as we lose our ability to recognize where these ideas, where these thoughts, where these patterns that we're recognizing are either no longer true or just no longer serving us and no longer doing us any favors. So what ends up happening is that we have different voices within our head. And we have different names for these voices. So, of course, we talk about, the inner child. So that is the id, that is the part of you that really just wants to experience happy things and really relies on seemingly external circumstances a lot of the time to stay happy and to feel at peace. And all that the inner child really wants is happiness and joy and love and peace. So it is the purest part of you. The inner child voice is usually the one that's like, I don't like this. I want to go have fun, right? Unfortunately, the inner child is also the one that says he didn't text me back for 3 hours, and so now that means that he doesn't love me anymore, and he hates me, and I need to leave him, and he's going to break up with me, and I'm going to die alone. So sometimes, the inner child voice is not particularly constructive. Then we've got the critical inner parent, and the critical inner parent is generally the voice that's giving us the hardest time. A lot of the critical parent voice does come from our parents. It also comes from society as a whole, though. So if you decide that you're going to get ready to go out and you really doll yourself up and you're feeling really good. You're feeling really confident, right? Like you're putting something on that makes you feel beautiful and sexy and amazing, absolutely incredible. And then you take a look in the mirror and you say, oh my God, I'm just so slutty. That's your critical inner parent. That's society coming to get you, essentially. That is society working its way into your head and getting you to feel bad about something that you otherwise felt good about. And then last, but certainly not least, we have the ego. And the ego is kind of the mediator in between your inner child and your critical parent. So it kind of incorporates all of your life experiences, all of your thoughts, all of your feelings, all these aspects of yourself, basically, and tries to mediate between them and pick the best possible option in any given set of circumstances, right? And actually, in a future episode, I am planning to go a lot more in depth about the ego because it is a very frequently discussed aspect of spirituality. And one that I don't think is discussed in a meaningful way, not necessarily meaning that you can't do a lot of really great work with the current level of information about the ego. Just that I think that people tend to see the ego really incorrectly. Either they don't provide very good tools or resources to kind of deconstruct it and work with it, or they see it as the outright enemy and don't really look at it from a place of understanding. So again, this episode is about releasing judgment. So maybe consider releasing your judgment towards your ego. It's only there to keep you safe. It's okay. Your ego is okay, as long as you don't listen to it too much. So, in general, judgment is assigning meaning, right? So, the problem with judgment is that we assign meaning to things that happen to us, to things that we think about ourselves, without first questioning, okay, where does this come from? Which voice is talking right now? Is this my inner child? Is this my critical parent? Is this my ego? Or is this me truly, right? Is this intuitive? Is this my heart speaking? Or is this my brain trying its hardest to fix all of the external circumstances surrounding me so that I can feel okay about something, so that I can fix the world around me, so that I can just feel good, right? So, of course, you can recognize things that are happening around you. And more importantly, you can recognize mistakes that you've made. Of course you can, right? Like, of course you can recognize your mistakes. Of course you can own your stuff. It's important to do so. But the problem comes in when you start to incorporate mistakes that you've made into your identity. Like, sometimes we're going to deal with things that are happening around us in a way that's not so meaningful, in a way that doesn't serve us particularly well. But when we then say, I'm a fuck up because I didn't act in an ideal way, that's when the issues start to happen, right? You can recognize that certain behaviors aren't really doing you any favors, but when you then start to beat yourself up for that, when you let your critical inner parent say, oh my God, what's wrong with you? When you start to call yourself names, when you start to tell yourself stories, when you start to assign so much meaning to certain things that they then become who you are, who you believe that you are on this core level, that's when you run into issues. That's when judgment becomes a problem. So something to remember is that it's not about stopping judging yourself. It's not even about stopping judging others. It's about recognizing when those judgments are valid and when they can really serve you, and recognizing when they're really not doing you any favors. And maybe it's time to abandon that and maybe give it a different meaning, or ideally just stop assigning meaning altogether. But I don't don't think that as people we are really capable of just not giving anything meaning. That is when the ego officially dissolves, and it's not a very pleasant experience. Speaking strictly from experience, we still have a modern world to navigate, so let's learn to work with judgments instead. So releasing judgment, again, not killing it, right? We're not killing anything. We're not destroying it. We're not getting rid of it. We're not removing judgments. We are gently releasing things that are not doing us any favors, right? Anytime you're doing something that's intended to let go of things, you are really gently releasing it, right? So releasing judgments, it just requires a few steps, and these steps are basically breakthroughs. These are things that I need you to understand. So the first level of understanding is just recognizing which voice is saying what, right? Who's talking? You can hear your inner voice, and you can learn to dissociate yourself from your inner voice and recognize, okay, I'm hearing a lot of mind chatter, and one of the best practices that I highly recommend is to just listen to your brain one day and see how many times it contradicts itself, and how absolutely fucking psychotic you truly sound inside of your own head, taken strictly from the Untethered Soul, by the way. But yeah, recognize which voice is saying what on top of that. So listen to your mind and then be like, okay, who's talking? Is this me? Is this the ego? Is this the critical parent? Is this the inner child? Who's saying this? An additional recognition that you need to have is that regardless of what you've done, you did the best that you could considering the circumstances. And I think that a lot of people understand that at a very basic level, right? Like, you did the best you could given the information that you had, but it goes deeper than that. And I would invite you to go a lot deeper with that understanding. So it's not just about what information you had. It's also about what feelings were going through you at the time. Because sometimes we do act on impulse. Sometimes we act knowing better, but it feels like we can't do the right thing, right? So maybe consciously, you know that you need to open up more to your partner when you're upset with them. Maybe you consciously recognize that you would do much better in your relationship if you just asked for what you wanted. But it's really easy to not do that when we are triggered, when we're going through something, when we've got this, core wound that's been touched on or ripped open, depending on the situation, right? I've been through a relationship knowing damn well how to have a very secure, healthy relationship. I mean, I worked in the fucking field for years, right? I know what a healthy relationship looks like, but because of how triggered I was in the relationship, because of how our dynamic was, because of how we interacted with each other, I completely lost any sense of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. I recognize that I didn't necessarily do the best that I could, but I did the best that I could considering how I was feeling, because when you are emotional and you're not really checking in with that, it's really hard to make a good conscious choice, right? So recognize that you've done the best you can considering the circumstances, not only in this lack of information, but also just when you were in an emotional space. And maybe there were more ideal ways that you could have acted, but for some reason, because of some blockage, because you didn't yet have, the tools, the skills that you need to make a better choice, to make a more conscious choice, to get out of your own way, in that moment you could not. So accept that you've never woken up one day and said, I want to take a sledgehammer to my entire life, right? No one wakes up and says, you know what? Things are going really well. I just want to burn it all down. Except for, maybe Elliot Lee. But at no point has anybody set out to make the wrong decision. And so unless you can sincerely say, yeah, I acted destructively for the sake of being destructive, I think maybe don't judge yourself too harshly for it. You will also need to recognize that any of your past transgressions don't define you unless you choose to let them define you, right? So again, this past relationship that I went through where I showed up in a very specific way, that wasn't me. It was my behavior, right? I was there. I was very much there. I was participating in the relationship. And all of the things that I did were things that I did. All of, my experience was definitely my experience. All of how I showed up was definitely how I showed up. But at the end of the day, my behaviors are not me. My choices in that relationship are not me, not on an identity level. And so it's really easy for us to say, okay, this is, what I did, and therefore this is who I am. And that's really not how it works. What you do is not who you are. What you've done is not who you are. And why you did something, why you do things, that's also not who you are. None of this has to define you unless you let it. And I would highly recommend that you pick something else other than your mistakes to define who you are. There are many better options, and I recommend exploring some of those options before you really commit to an identity of your fuck ups. You will also need to recognize that every mistake that you make is an opportunity to grow. You will also need to recognize the impermanence of everything. And you will need to recognize that at the end of the day, you're okay, right? On a base consciousness level, you are okay. No matter what you've done, no matter who you are, where you've been. Sorry, I'm so sorry. But at the end of the day, you are okay. In fact, I would go so far as to say that at the end of the day, everything is okay. So let's talk about releasing judgment towards others, because this is also incredibly important. Now, if you can learn to practice this radical self-love, this radical compassion and understanding with yourself, it then becomes very, very, very easy to do it for other people as well, right? If you can learn to extend yourself the favor of understanding, then you will almost immediately become an expert at extending that same understanding to other people. And that's beautiful. So if you are not going to do this exercise for yourself, do it for the sake of being so much kinder and so much more understanding towards others. So releasing judgment towards others is a very similar process. It's all about seeing if you can figure out if what they've done, if what they're saying, right? Where is that coming from? Is it them talking, or is that their ego? Is that their inner child? Is that their critical parent, right? You can learn to start to recognize other people's voices as soon as you can learn to recognize them in yourself. And especially if they're saying really similar things to what you've told yourself in the past, right? Or what you said towards other people in the past. So, I mean, a really good example of this, honestly, is, having recovered from quite a bit of trauma, and having recovered from quite a bit of, destructive behaviors in my life, for being completely honest. I know the thoughts that went into it. I know the thoughts that drove the behaviors, and I know the feelings that drove the behaviors. And I know on a very deep level, I understand entirely what that feels like. And I know what my inner voice was saying. I know what drove me to do the things that I was doing. And so when I talk with other people and I hear those same thoughts, it's like, I know where that's coming from. I understand that. And so it's very easy to have compassion for other people when you can recognize parts of yourself within somebody else, and know that they didn't choose that for themselves, right? And so when you practice that and you get really good at that, you can also start to have that same inner knowing towards other people, even when they're reflecting something that you don't necessarily believe. So I mean, I've gotten a lot less judgmental towards people with differing political beliefs because I have learned to recognize when they're talking, whether the things that they're saying are really coming from a place of love or from a place of fear, right? I can tell when somebody's talking from their ego. I can tell when people are talking from their inner child. I don't hear people talking from their critical parent so much. And I really don't think that we verbalize our critical parent too much. Usually by the time your critical parent is speaking up loud enough for you to then embody them, I think you're generally just reduced to tears at that point. So, but you can learn to recognize that. And so you can start to ask yourself, okay, why is this person where they are? How can I show them compassion? How can I show them understanding, knowing that right now they're speaking from their ego? You also need to have compassion in the sense that you recognize that just like you, they are also doing their best, right? So I think we've got this kind of society of judgment towards, you've seen like the public freak out compilations, right? Where there's, some middle-aged white lady just screaming in McDonald's at some 15-year-old cashier. And objectively, yeah, no, that's awful. No one wants to see that, right? No one should accept that kind of behavior from an adult. But at the same time, it's like, okay, why is this what this person chose to do in this moment, right? Why is this the best possible scenario that they could choose? Because we all know that throwing a fit in public is a quote unquote bad thing, right? I use that word very lightly. But we all recognize like, oh my God, if I acted like that, I would be so embarrassed, right? Okay, well, is that you talking, or is that your critical inner parent? Is that society talking? Because we accept as a society that it's a bad thing and we judge as a society, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe sometimes it is justified. It doesn't really matter. That's the other thing is like, don't try to assert other people's quote unquote mistakes. Again, using that word lightly, right? Don't assert what you perceive about other people as their identity. Just as you are not your thoughts or feelings, other people are also not your thoughts or feelings about them. And again, you still have to recognize that no matter what happens externally to you, you're okay. Your consciousness is okay. So, yeah, no, public freakouts, they're not ideal. They're absolutely not ideal. I am not saying please go start freaking out at 15-year-olds working at McDonald's. Bless their hearts. They've got it hard enough, right? But recognize that when other people are doing it and you're sitting there and you're really harshly judging them for it, figure out if that's your inner voice, like truly you that is judging them, or if it's that sense of like, oh my God, if I did the same thing, then I would think that I was a terrible person. And so therefore I think that they're a terrible person and I need for them to feel like they're a terrible person because they're doing this thing and I need them to understand how bad it is. It's like, you don't have to associate yourself with that. You don't have to make that your business. You don't have to let it ruin your day when it happens. You can just be okay. You can witness it happening. You can say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I'm not doing that. I'm so glad that that's not me. And move on. Just let it go. Just experience it, witness it, see if you can learn from it, and let it go. I will say that I think the absolute least constructive thing that we can do in moments like that is to pull out our cell phones and then throw them on the internet, because you are really... I know that this is not something that a lot of people are going to want to hear, but if I'm being completely honest, if I'm speaking as myself, if I'm speaking from my soul to yours, when we choose to highlight other people's negative behaviors like that, when we choose to take somebody's low moment and then expose them, we choose to throw that on the internet to live there forever. What you're really doing is taking something that is impermanent and trying really hard to make it permanent. And part of this is coming from, the place of me that's terrified that, if I ever do something wrong, oh my God, like, 1 billion people are going to see it and it's going to follow me until my grave. Not that I act like that, so it's not really a big concern of mine. But honestly, I would question what any of us get out of, both being the person behind the camera who chooses to share that awful moment of somebody's life with everybody. What are they getting out of it? And then also, what are we getting out of it by then witnessing it or judging that person? And I think that a lot of it is just, it's such a huge part of our shadow as a society, where we are expected to be polite and we are expected to behave in a certain way. And that's understandable. It's very necessary for us to do that. But is it necessary for us to also be the enforcers? And is it necessary for us to spend so much time criticizing other people for expressing these parts of ourselves that we choose to repress, for the sake of living in civilization, right? You get all the benefits of living in civilization if you choose to follow the rules. But when other people choose not to follow the rules, we tend to shame them very heavily and feel very superior towards them. When in reality, if you actually look at the situation, all that it is a grown adult who, quote unquote, should know better, not knowing better in that moment, not acting better in that moment. And I think that we need to back away from the urge to tar and feather the people that act out of line with what we believe to be true, what we know to be true. Because honestly, if you really look at this within yourself, that part of you also exists. You just choose to throw it into your shadow, right? If you are a person who watches public freakouts and takes great joy in witnessing, a Karen freaking out, that's not your soul. Your soul does not revel in witnessing other people having emotional breakdowns. It just doesn't. That doesn't bring peace and joy and love into the world. That doesn't bring peace and joy and love and enlightenment within you. What you're doing is saying, I get to disown that part of myself even more now. That's why it feels good, because you know that that's not part of yourself that you have to claim, because you're not doing it. You can turn your back on it. And anytime we turn our backs on our shadows, what are we really doing? We are creating a demon, right? We're not dealing with something. We are ignoring something. And I can guarantee you that if you continue to really feed off of and enjoy the experience of witnessing other people freaking out in public, at some point, the camera is going to be pointed at you. And I know that that concept is very alien to people, because it's like, why on earth would I act like that? I know better. It's really precious that you think that you know better. I love that for you. I love hearing your ego say that. But in reality, that is very much part of yourself. It's just the part of you that lives in the shadow. It's the part of you that you have chosen to repress. And repression takes a lot of willpower. And I would invite you to really investigate what drove that Karen to act the way that she was acting. Because chances are you have similar experiences that call up similar feelings within yourself, right? Because usually the Karen, we get that sense of entitlement from them. Okay, they deserve something, they're not receiving it, and they choose to emotionally obliterate somebody else. Not the best choice? Not at all. But how often are you dealing with a partner where you want something and they are not giving it to you, right? And so you choose to emotionally obliterate that person, maybe not by shouting at them in a checkout line, but by giving them the silent treatment, right? By turning around and going to one of your friends and complaining about them, right? It's the same feeling. It's the same demon. It's just causing a different behavior. So unless, again, you have lived a life pure and free of mistakes, I would invite you to investigate what's going on truly. Maybe you're following societal rules in any given moment, but would you want for somebody to record a video of you giving your partner the silent treatment and throw that on the internet for all to witness? I mean, it wouldn't be very entertaining, but, would you want that behavior to be broadcast to the world? My guess is no, right? So let's maybe back away from the public shamings. Let's maybe even back away from the canceling. And maybe just start to learn to own the parts within ourselves that we are seeing in very big displays of emotions in other people, and recognize that, yeah, they're letting a certain part of them get the best of this, in this moment. And that's okay. It's okay. It's okay to do that. I get it. I don't always act in my right mind either, right? Do any of us? It's my question for you. Now, if we speak less psychologically and more spiritually, and this is actually how we're going to wrap up this episode, understand that when we release judgment, we remove our energetic blocks on ourselves, right? Like when we stop telling ourselves our stories, we are letting go of our limiting beliefs so that we can truly grow. And when we release judgment that we hold towards other people, we take away the energetic blocks that we place on those people that are honestly halting their growth, right? We are all connected energetically. We are all just parts of the universe observing itself from an infinite number of perspectives. We all influence other people with our energy, with our actions, with our thoughts, with our feelings towards them. So if you want someone else to grow, you have to stop focusing on their stagnation. You have to stop believing that they are never going to grow. If you want someone else to be honest, you have to stop focusing on them as a liar. If you want someone else to be kind, you have to stop considering them to be a mean person. Anytime you do that, it's limiting them. You are sending energy their way and trying to keep them contained in this negative view that you have of them. You are holding them back. It's not good for anybody, and it's not helping you either, because again, you are just turning your back on this part of yourself that you're choosing not to recognize. So you're just going to create more repression and more inner demons within yourself. You really have to understand yourself. You really have to understand other people. Period. I'm sorry, but that's what you have to do. That's your assignment. Now, if someone is toxic, you can absolutely remove them from your life, right? If somebody's yelling at you in a Walmart checkout line, you have the right to walk away and say, yeah, I don't really deserve this. Okay. If your partner is truly not showing you any signs of growth, if it's not a loving relationship, if it's not fulfilling, and you're doing the work and you're not seeing them do the work, if they're not putting in the effort, walk away. You deserve better. It's okay. Right? But if you choose to let them remain, you also have to consider why. And I believe that on a soul level, we tolerate undesirable behavior because we still have a lesson to learn from it, right? Like you're still with the partner who refuses to grow because there's something that you still need to learn and take away from that so that you can grow outside of the relationship, moving forward. And maybe that lesson sometimes is that some people, whether that be a partner, a family member, a friend, or Karen. Some people, you have to love them from afar. And that is what I am going to leave you with. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for connecting. I got a new microphone, so hopefully the audio is a little bit better than the previous episode was. If you've got any feedback for me, I would love to hear it. You can also find us on YouTube. We're on Spotify now, which is pretty cool too. I think we're on Apple Music now too, which that was quick. As always, I love you all. I am sending lots of good vibes out your way, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye. Bye.